In the report, you mentioned about Apple, and I think you also give reference to Amazon and the fact that how they're not focusing on the product, they're moving towards this experience, and then I think in the next paragraph you argue against that being, or you argue for that it's about the experience as opposed to the revenue that they're going to be getting for this. I just wonder, because when if you look at what's written about Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and others, they all seem to be, when they move to a reoccurring revenue model, it seems to have a very positive impact on their value. So which is similar to what the health clubs, I suppose, have been doing for many years. Is you've got that predictable income, and you want to get people on that sort of business model as opposed to just pay as you go. Do you think that Apple are just they're 32 billion high margin business? The people who invest in them seem to like the fact when they get more of these reoccurring revenues. Do you think that's really the driver? As opposed to them just trying to create an experience, or not?
I think that you've got an input and an output there. So I think that it is the generation of the experience which is the generator of the revenue. So it is the generator of, even when I wrote the report, the Apple Fitness Plus was only just coming out. People underestimate the importance of services to Apple. When you talk about the largest SaaS companies, the largest one out there is Salesforce, and well-known global brand. But it pales into insignificance to the 55 billion that Apple get in recurring revenues through services on an annual basis. Do I think that is an effort to move their hardware lumpier revenue share into a recurring business model? No, I think that when you move in and you create an ecosystem around a phone which is purchased, which then has attached to it multiple services, whether it be Apple TV, whether it be storage, whether it be Apple News Plus, or whether it be Apple Fitness. And Google's the same, right? The challenge for both Google and Samsung is that they don't have the same ownership of their ecosystem. They have to rely on each other and the development and the evolution of each other because of the Android operating system. But the recurring revenues have multiple powers for the organization, but also for the consumer as well. It gives you the capacity to build the experience with the user and then to incrementally increase. I wonder how many people could remember the initial price they paid for their Netflix subscription when they started, and how much that has subsequently gone up. I know in the United Kingdom, we've just had our third increase in a matter of 18 months. However, it doesn't make any news headlines. It would be open warfare in my house if I decided that Netflix was no longer going to be part of the entertainment options. And that is an open example of why. Now, that would be very different in Apple's case, if you use that as an example, if Dad had decided no one was allowed an Apple 11 this year because they got an iPhone X last year, right? Because they are different scales of consumer spending. And therefore, what Apple is doing is it builds with the idea of increasing its ecosystem and its influence over your day-to-day life by giving you that Apple experience. Now, that can be a great Apple experience, Apple Podcasts, Apple Music. It can be a terrible one if you look at Apple Maps, right? And then you've got things like CarPlay. Apple is starting to get into a whole host of other areas, and they will then develop that out, right? So Apple TV has now become part of a much larger part where they're doing their own production. So when Apple said that they were going to move aggressively into health, and the initial parts were doing the ECG on the phone. Look how they've progressed over 18 months. Look at what they're developing and they're evolving into. And, it's not, for some that will say Apple having gyms, well, I remember an awful lot of people saying Apple having retail seemed ridiculous, right? Now, Apple won't have gyms because Apple wants to compete with bricks and mortar. Apple will have gyms so that they can give the experience on a personal basis. So that I've got the capacity to get the Apple fitness experience in an Apple environment. And, it's interesting to think of what that could look like. But big tech enters this market. And one of the elements I wrote in the report was that, we need to, as operators, understand what part we should look to play. We don't have the risk appetite and the culture of risk that comes with working in one of those tech organizations. We don't have the capital reserves. In fact, balance sheets are in many cases decimated, at the very least, very strained in the current environment. And the driver of experience, the driver of innovation is always going to be talent. And I can guarantee you there's not many people coming out of MIT, Caltech, or anywhere else and going, I tell you what, I'm desperate to go and join one of those fitness giants because they're on the cutting edge of what matters, right? They're going off to the other tech players, and those tech players are looking at our sector. And why wouldn't they, right? I mean, our sector, when you include the wellness sector, is one of the largest sectors out there. And it is one which has great opportunity for increase. That is why I think we're going to continue to see them working within. And that's why I think we'll continue to see innovation, and why it's important for us as brick and mortar operators to understand what our part is in that, because I think we can benefit and can grow.
Yeah, I think that's the key part, is how do you play in that space? I remember being at a FIBO event, probably be a couple of years ago now, prior to the FIBO, and there's this big discussion about, well, who owns the data? And I think there was one camp saying, well, look, us as a health club, we need to own the data. It's our data, it's no one else's. And then the others were like, well, that will eventually change, because you're not going to be able to own and control the data. And I suppose if you look at Apple, in terms of the different areas they're getting involved in, the more that you're involved on an Apple device, the more they're learning about you and your behaviors and your habits and everything else. And I suppose with what you talk about, this machine learning, they're going to then take that and continue and almost be able to sort of predict more and more and get powerful and powerful. So I suppose you've got to, at some point, have to accept that it's unlikely that you will be able to control that ecosystem or the data. So what can we do? Where do we focus on with, you're obviously a lot more knowledgeable about that side of things than others, but where do we focus on? Because as you said, developing an app, I've spoke to a number of people. Martin Seibold was an example on the podcast a few weeks ago, where he said they put a fortune into developing an app, and just realized that they couldn't win in that space. That's not their core business. So they've partnered with somebody to do that on the content perspective. So I guess content's a difficult beast unless that's what you do. Technology is probably a difficult beast, because that's probably not what you do. That's certainly not where your DNA is. So what do they do? Is it focusing on partners for both content and tech? Is it a case of that you need to get a really good architect in your business that can understand this space and then, sub out different parts? Where do you see it going?
I agree with Martin that there are challenges always when you look to build products like this. And my suggestion is not that should be the case. I think that what needs to be understood first is, where do we think that value can be? We don't want to build an app for an app's sake. And let's face it, the industry has currently got an awful lot of apps for apps' sake, right? There's a necessity. I mean, I've had conversations with operators where they have the app and they are currently moving their entrance system over to the app. Okay, why? So they can force their users into utilizing the app. That's never going to be the way to get adoption. An app is no more than a vehicle for the experience. So therefore, what we need to concentrate on is the experience. Do you want to be, to me, the consumer, the guardian of my wellness, by having the capacity to communicate to me both whilst I'm on your premises and off the premises, because you centrally have my wellness as a main constituent of how you exist. So if that is the case, what information should you look to capture or have access to that you can do that to? Now, I think we've just had that conversation. I could very easily sketch out how that could look. And I've looked at it from a generic perspective as well. Technically, these challenges are not extensive. What is extensive is when people look to build an app, they look at the competitive products that are available in the market from the other competitors they've got, and then try and add on top or be everything. Consumers will tell you that they utilize apps when they give them value. Most apps aren't even on the first page, and those that are on the second page and the third page and fourth page start to move into the tiny percentages of probability they'll ever be utilized. Most users now will turn off notifications, so there's challenges in that area. So if I was designing an app now, and let's take aside the digital workouts, which you have a separate conversation on because there's things to consider there. I would be looking at what would be the reason why someone would want to download my membership app. Now, you can go for the force, which is, well, that's what your membership card is. You're not getting in without it, right? But I would also look to what possibilities have I got to be able to blend the information which I am already generating as an organization with what they are currently doing or the situation they're in. So I access the Apple SDK and I bring in the relative information on a regular basis so that I can start making those assessments. I can, for instance, start to generate congratulations around particular activities or milestones which happen both in and outside, right? I've got the capacity to know more about my members. So I would map out, in the paper, what I try to suggest is that look at the app as one aspect. Fundamentally, technology aside, consumers want a more personalized experience. They get it with every other aspect of their life, whether it be what to buy on Amazon, what to listen to on Spotify, and what to watch on Netflix. Artificial intelligence, or whatever else you want to call it, there are algorithms, processes, and intent to make sure that each one of us has a more personalized experience. That is extending and needs to extend to bricks and mortar delivery of fitness. Why? Because the digital element starts at that premise and then has to look at how to manage the fact that the user may not have equipment, et cetera, whereby it's a complete opposite with the bricks and mortar. So they need to take that into account. Looking at that, and then looking at, MyZone's a great example of where we can actually look at output, look at performance on a live basis within a class, right? But I think the necessity for us to be able to translate that through so that we can actually capture some of that within the app and then be able to use that to do the motivation or to give the counsel or indeed to help when it comes to the PT is going to be valuable. Someone will come up with it, Matthew, right? It's not, this, by the way, is in no way, do not have an expectation I'm going to launch a product in this area. I got plenty on at the moment and have no intentions of doing it elsewhere. But, I have every expectation of a number of telephone calls. I've had 2 with CEOs from significant operators, 100 plus sites one, 230 sites plus on the other, who are going down this route, right? Who are looking at quite literally how they can put personalization in at scale. And, personalization is not making sure that the member's name when you write an email letter. This is genuinely trying to take into account the holistic journey that every member has on a daily basis, both in and out, stresses and strains, home, family, and office, into things so that they can personalize the way they communicate, offer services, deliver services, and retain the member over longer periods of time.